The moment she stepped onto the wrong private ferry, she thought she had finally made the first mistake of her new life. What she didn't know was that the quiet man standing at the wheel had recognized her name before she even introduced herself, and he deliberately chose not to tell her that she was sailing toward an island she had never been invited to visit. Maya had spent the last 3 years learning how quickly a life could fall apart. After her mother died, the small apartment they had shared became too expensive to keep. Her job at a seaside hotel disappeared when the hotel closed for renovations, and the little savings she had carefully collected vanished into medical bills and rent. At 29, Maya felt as if everyone else had been given a map for life while she had been left standing at the edge of the road with nothing but a worn suitcase and a letter from an old friend named Clara. The letter contained only a few lines, telling Maya that there was work waiting for her on Belmere Island and that the owner of a small guesthouse needed someone trustworthy immediately. It was the first hopeful message Maya had received in months. That morning, she arrived at the harbor before sunrise, clutching the letter and a faded photograph of her mother. The wind was cold, the sea restless, and the harbor lights trembled across the dark water. Maya hurried toward the ferry terminal after seeing a small boat preparing to leave. A crewman took one look at her ticket, pointed toward the deck, and told her she could board. Exhausted and distracted, she assumed it was the public ferry to Belmere. She stepped aboard, placed her suitcase beside a wooden bench, and finally allowed herself to breathe. Only one other passenger was visible. He stood near the wheelhouse, tall and silent, wearing a dark coat despite the mild morning. His name was Daniel Vale, though Maya did not know that yet. To the people of the coast, Daniel was more than a wealthy businessman. He owned the ferry, the private dock, several buildings on Belmere Island, and the old Vale estate that stood above the cliffs. He rarely traveled with strangers, and he certainly did not allow ordinary passengers onto his private ferry. But when Daniel saw Maya, something changed in his expression. He had seen her photograph before. Clara had shown it to him months earlier while explaining that Maya might eventually need help. Clara was Daniel's younger sister, and she had secretly arranged for Maya to receive the guesthouse job. She had also warned Daniel that Maya was proud and would never accept charity. Daniel had expected a frightened young woman carrying too much sadness. He had not expected her to accidentally walk onto his private ferry. He could have corrected her immediately. Instead, he simply started the engine. Maya sat quietly as the mainland disappeared behind them. For the first 20 minutes, she watched the waves and imagined the guesthouse, the new job, the possibility of starting again. Then she noticed something strange. The shoreline was moving in the wrong direction. The ferry was traveling away from Belmere. Her stomach tightened. She looked at Daniel and finally asked where they were going. He studied her for a moment before calmly telling her that the island would take another 40 minutes. Maya accepted the answer, embarrassed by her own nervousness. She did not know that Daniel had carefully chosen every word without actually lying. As the ferry approached the island, Maya saw enormous cliffs rising from the sea and a lonely stone house above them. This was not the welcoming village she had imagined. It looked beautiful, but almost painfully isolated. When the ferry reached the private dock, Maya stepped onto the pier and immediately realized her mistake. There was no public terminal, no small shops, no guesthouse sign, and no one waiting for her. She turned toward Daniel, horrified. He looked at her suitcase and then at the old photograph sticking from its pocket. Instead of laughing at her mistake, he simply picked up the suitcase and began walking toward the estate. Maya followed because she had nowhere else to go. Inside the enormous house, everything felt strangely quiet. Daniel asked whether she had eaten. She shook her head. He instructed the housekeeper to prepare breakfast and told Maya that she could use the guest room until the weather improved. Maya was confused. She insisted she had no money to pay for such a place. Daniel told her she didn't need to pay. That frightened her more than anything. She had learned that kindness often came with invisible conditions. People who offered help sometimes expected something in return. Maya refused breakfast, refused the room, and prepared to leave despite the storm gathering outside. Then Daniel finally showed her the letter Clara had written. Maya stared at it, stunned. Clara had arranged everything. Daniel explained that his sister had planned to meet Maya at the public ferry terminal, but a family emergency had taken her away that morning. Daniel had intended to send someone to collect Maya later. He never expected her to board his private ferry by mistake. Maya looked at him and asked why he hadn't corrected her. Daniel's answer was painfully simple. He had watched her sleep for a few minutes during the crossing, her hand wrapped tightly around her mother's photograph, and he realized she looked like someone who had been fighting alone for too long. He had decided that, for once, he would let her arrive somewhere without having to beg anyone to let her stay. That night, Maya learned the real reason Clara had arranged the job. The guest house wasn't simply a business. It had belonged to Clara and Daniel's mother, who had died years earlier. Clara believed Maya had the patience and warmth needed to restore it. Daniel had been planning to sell the property, but his sister had asked him to give it one final chance. Over the next few weeks, Maya began repairing the abandoned guest house. She cleaned dusty rooms, painted walls, planted flowers, and opened curtains that had remained closed for years. Daniel watched from a distance, slowly becoming less guarded. Maya discovered that beneath his wealth was a lonely man who had stopped trusting people after losing his parents and later his closest friend in an accident at sea. Neither of them spoke about loneliness directly. They simply began sharing small moments. Coffee on the porch. Long walks near the cliffs. Quiet evenings repairing old furniture. A smile when Maya successfully fixed something Daniel had declared impossible. Slowly, the island that had first terrified her began to feel like home. But just when Maya thought her life was finally changing, she discovered something that broke her heart. The guest house was in serious debt. Daniel had never told her because he knew she would blame herself. The property was scheduled to be sold within 30 days. Maya realized that all her hard work might disappear. For the first time, she became angry with Daniel. She told him she didn't need someone to rescue her. She needed someone to believe that she could rescue herself. Those words changed him. Instead of selling the guest house, Daniel gave Maya control of the restoration project. He trusted her plans, invested in the repairs, and allowed her to turn the property into the warm seaside inn she had imagined from the beginning. Within months, visitors began arriving. The little guest house became successful. And Maya finally understood why Daniel had never corrected her on that ferry. He hadn't been trying to trap her on his island. He had simply seen someone who desperately needed a place where she could stop running. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes one small act of kindness can become the beginning of an entirely new life. 1 year later, Maya stood on the same dock where she had first stepped off the wrong ferry. The guest house behind her was glowing with warm lights, filled with laughter and guests. Daniel stood beside her, holding the old photograph of her mother that had once been tucked inside her suitcase. Maya smiled and told him that boarding the wrong ferry had been the best mistake she had ever made. Daniel looked toward the island and quietly replied that sometimes the wrong road takes us exactly where we were meant to be. Maya looked at the sea, remembering the frightened woman who had arrived with one suitcase, no money, and no idea what awaited her. She had thought she had boarded the wrong boat. In reality, she had boarded the first chapter of her second chance. If this story touched your heart, please support the video with a like, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more emotional stories about love, kindness, and second chances. And before you go, comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe that one unexpected moment can change an entire life. Because sometimes, the mistake we fear most is not a mistake at all. Sometimes it is simply life quietly taking us somewhere our hearts were too afraid to go on their own.